They made us laugh, made us cry, and for a time we worshipped them. But what if those perfect smiles were a mask for something far darker? When power curdled into manipulation, affection into control, and fame into a weapon, the line between hero and monster disappeared. Which actors, musicians, and icons crossed that line, and how deep did they fall? Stay until the end. The final reveal may be the one you least expect. 15. Ezra Miller. Once hailed as the future of the screens, a fearless performer with a disarming unpredictability and an edge that made casting rooms sit up, Ezra Miller seemed to promise a new kind of stardom. Early roles like We Need to Talk About Kevin and The Perks of Being a Wallflower earned praise for a raw, modern voice. When they donned the scarlet suit of the Flash, it felt as if a major career was only beginning. Instead of illumination, fame became combustible. By the early 2020s, the headlines stopped celebrating craft and skewed toward chaos. Reports of bar altercations in Hawaii, multiple run-ins with law enforcement, and viral clips of strange, erratic conduct followed them across states. Close friends and exo-associates painted a bleaker picture, accusations of manipulation, paranoia, and sudden, alarming aggression that made eccentricity look like unraveling. Those personal troubles hardened into darker allegations. Families came forward, saying that admiration had been turned into control, that young people drawn to Miller's charisma were isolated and groomed under the guise of mentorship. The recurring details suggested a pattern: charm wielded as a means of power over vulnerable people. Legally, Miller ultimately faced lesser convictions than some early headlines implied, but the reputational harm was deep and lasting. Studios were blasted for how they handled a marquee actor, and a film meant to propel a cinematic era instead became a lightning rod for controversy. Public patience frayed. Apologies and promises of change rang hollow to many. What began as a story of daring artistry has become a cautionary tale about celebrity and excess, a gifted actor whose talent was eclipsed by behavior that proved unmanageable, leaving a once bright trajectory in tatters and a red costume that now reads as a symbol of downfall rather than triumph. 14. Armie Hammer. Armie Hammer grew up surrounded by wealth and expectation, his polished looks and cool assurance seeming to carve a direct path to stardom. After memorable turns in high-profile films, he was widely seen as a modern leading man, cultured, articulate, and effortlessly charming in interviews and on the red carpet. Yet, as headlines later revealed, a darker narrative was taking shape behind the public persona. In the early part of the decade, private messages leaked online that were lurid and unsettling, allegedly depicting fantasies of domination, violence, and even cannibalism. What began as salacious gossip swelled into a torrent of accusations as multiple women came forward with strikingly similar accounts of coercion, manipulation, and emotional abuse. Hammer categorically denied the claims, calling them fabrications, but the consistency of the stories and the intimacy of the details kept the controversy alive. Authorities opened an investigation, which was ultimately closed without controversial charges, but the damage to his reputation was swift and severe. Film roles and industry relationships evaporated, leaving a career that had once seemed destined for the highest heights in tatters. Media reports later suggested he had retreated from the spotlight and was working outside the industry in the Caribbean, a stark contrast to the fairy tale image that once defined him. Whether judged as a predator, a product of his own impulses, or a celebrity undone by scandal, Hammer's fall has become a cautionary tale about the gap between public image and private conduct. 13. Danny Masterson. He was television's idea of effortless cool in the late 1990s, playing Stephen Hyde on That 70s Show, the rebellious, laconic stoner who seemed to flout authority with a smirk. On screen, he was charmingly irreverent, the kind of actor audiences thought they knew. Off-screen, however, that image unraveled into something far darker. Multiple women, many affiliated with the Church of Scientology, came forward accusing him of drugging and sexually assaulting them during the peak of his career. Their accounts echoed one another. Evenings that began with drinks and laughter that ended in disorientation and trauma. They say when they sought help, they were urged to stay silent to safeguard the reputation of a celebrity. For years, those accusations were downplayed or ignored, but in the wake of the Me Too movement, the allegations gained new force. In 2023, after a highly publicized retrial, he was found guilty of assaulting 2 women. Victims gave harrowing testimony about fear and secrecy that had shadowed their lives for decades. The judge described him as a danger to the public and imposed a sentence of 30 years to life. The fall from sitcom star to convicted felon was swift and total. Former colleagues kept their distance, fans wrestled with betrayed memories, and the church that had once been part of his support network faced renewed scrutiny. His story became less a celebrity scandal and more a cautionary tale about how status and institutional loyalty can silence survivors. 12. Kevin Spacey. For years, Kevin Spacey was the picture of Hollywood refinement, a voice of quiet menace, a performer whose presence could make a simple scene feel electric. From his Oscar-winning turn in American Beauty to his commanding lead in House of Cards, he seemed to personify control and charisma, a choice collaborator for directors seeking gravity and intellect. Behind that polished veneer, however, a darker narrative emerged that would unravel his career. In the latter part of the last decade, an allegation from actor Anthony Rapp thrust Spacey into the spotlight for the wrong reasons, prompting a response that many saw as evasive and self-serving. That disclosure opened the floodgates. Other men stepped forward with accounts spanning years and continents, describing patterns of coercion, harassment, and encounters that took place backstage, in hotel rooms, and in private settings. The industry reaction was swift and severe. Streaming and studio partnerships were severed, long-running projects were terminated, and completed films were altered to remove him. Legal battles followed in both the United States and the United Kingdom, with some proceedings dismissed and others resolving with not guilty findings, yet the public damage was already done. What was once admired as inscrutable poise began to be read as predatory calculation. Public statements and apologies felt rehearsed and cold to many, eroding any separation between the roles he played and the allegations against him. Today, Spacey exists at the margins of the entertainment world he once helped define. Regardless of legal outcomes, his professional legacy has been irrevocably changed, a reminder that talent cannot shield someone from accountability. 11. Marilyn Manson. Marilyn Manson made a career out of provocation. He was more than a musician. He was a living performance, a figure dressed in black makeup and theatrical menace who forced audiences to confront their own taboos. Admirers saw an iconoclast exposing social hypocrisy. Detractors saw a corrosive influence cloaked in glamour. His shows often felt ceremonial, his songs a manifesto of transgression. But as the persona hardened, the boundary between spectacle and real life began to crack. In the later part of the past decade, the cultivated image of the beautiful monster began to unravel. Actress Evan Rachel Wood spoke publicly of manipulation, emotional cruelty, and sensitive matters, violence from a relationship when she was young. Other women came forward with similar accounts, describing isolation, coercive control, extreme sleep disruption, threats, and even allegations of branding behaviors that read less like stagecraft and more like abuse. He denied the claims, dismissing them as fabricated. Yet court documents, interviews, and accumulations of testimony suggested a pattern that many could not ignore. Legal actions followed, some resolved, others still moving through the system. The industry that once celebrated him recoiled. Labels distanced themselves, distributors and platforms curtailed his presence, and the career he had carefully built began to decay. For decades he used darkness as an artistic vocabulary, blood, blasphemy, and chaos presented as art. When that theater was stripped away, what remained felt like admission rather than artifice. The persona that once provoked now casts a darker shadow, a caution about what happens when myth-making outweighs accountability. He claimed his aim was to unsettle audiences. Ultimately, he succeeded, but not in the way he or his devotees intended. 10. R. Kelly. His voice once rose above the noise. He wrote songs that became fixtures in people's lives. I Believe I Can Fly was more than a chart topper. It was a pledge. For years his music talked about faith, redemption, love, and millions believed the man behind the melodies was sincere. He was hailed as an R&B genius, someone who spun pain into poetry. But behind the studio gloss and the platinum records, he was building something darker, a system of control, secrecy, and fear. Rumors trailed him for years, girls hidden away, hush money paid, and a marriage certificate tying him to an underage singer. People muttered, but the business often looked the other way. His records still climbed the charts, his shows still sold, and fame seemed to shield him. He became untouchable, or so it appeared, until attention sharpened. When the documentary Surviving R. Kelly aired near the end of the 2010s, that illusion cracked. Scores of women stepped forward, telling stories of long campaigns of grooming, sensitive matters, abuse, and confinement. They said he sequestered them, cut them off from loved ones, and controlled what they wore, ate, and who they could contact. Prosecutors described it as organized abuse, a controversial enterprise thinly veiled as a career. In 2021, a federal jury convicted him of sex trafficking and racketeering. The next year, another court found him guilty of producing child pornography. He now faces many years behind bars, his public voice muted not by fading stardom, but by the force of the law finally catching up. He once asked the world to believe they could fly, but his ascent was built on the broken wings of those he harmed. His story has shifted from one about talent and fame to a harder question. How long will a society let a predator sing before it hears the cries beneath the chorus? 9. Bill Cosby. For generations, Bill Cosby seemed woven into the fabric of American family life. He was not merely a star, he was the kindly father figure on television, doling out lessons about respect and love with a disarming grin. His program shifted the landscape of entertainment, opened doors for black performers, and shaped how an entire generation thought about decency. Parents trusted him, children looked up to him. He stood as a public symbol of moral authority. Yet behind that warm persona lurked a far darker reality. Over more than 5 decades, women quietly shared stories that many found impossible to accept. The accounts followed a hauntingly similar pattern. One-on-one encounters, drinks altered without consent, and fractured memories that turned into lasting trauma. Dozens of people described comparable scenes, and the same sense of alarm. When some tried to speak out, his fame and influence insulated him. Wealth and status helped silence accusations, and the industry often turned away. It took a determined legal challenge to pierce that shell. The case brought by Andrea Constand reopened wounds that had long been dismissed, and in 2018, a jury convicted Cosby of aggravated indecent assault, ending with him being led from the courthouse in handcuffs. Years later, that conviction was overturned on a procedural ground, and he was released, but the verdict of public opinion had already been rendered. The image of the beloved educator and comedian was shattered, replaced by one of betrayal and hypocrisy. A man who taught values and commanded trust had, according to many accounts, used that trust as a shield. His story is not simply a celebrity downfall, it is a profound breach of faith, and the laughter he once inspired is forever altered. 8. Harvey Weinstein. He was the man who could open doors in Hollywood. His name was tied to some of the most celebrated films of the modern era: Pulp Fiction, Shakespeare in Love, Good Will Hunting, and he wielded the kind of influence that could turn an unknown actor or director into a star with a single call. For decades, colleagues, studios, and talent bowed to his judgment. He was a producer, a kingmaker, the architect behind red carpets and acceptance speeches. Yet the glamour hid a long, dark pattern. Rumors circulated for years about meetings that began as career discussions and ended in exploitation. about auditions and hotel rooms where boundaries were ignored and careers were threatened. People whispered. Agents and assistants exchanged warnings, but few spoke out publicly. His power felt absolute. Silence and complicity kept the machinery running and the rumors buried. Everything changed in 2017 when investigative reporting lifted that cover. Major outlets exposed decades of alleged sensitive matters, misconduct and assault, and scores of women came forward. Assistants, models, actresses, even award winners, each account echoing the same coercive pattern. The revelations reframed him not as a brilliant impresario, but as someone who had used his status to prey on the vulnerable. In 2020, a New York court found him guilty of serious allegations and other sensitive matters offenses, and he was given a lengthy prison term. A few years later, a Los Angeles jury delivered another conviction, tacking on additional years and further sealing his fate. The downfall was as dramatic as his rise. His case sparked a broader reckoning. The movement that followed amplified survivors' voices, forced industries to confront systemic abuses of power, and exposed how a star-making system had sheltered wrongdoing. Once synonymous with triumphs on the silver screen, his name is now a cautionary emblem of how fame and influence can be weaponized and of the consequences when the veil finally comes down. 7. O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson was once the embodiment of effortless success, a record-breaking athlete who crossed into film and advertising with the same easy charm. He smiled into cameras, sold products, and seemed to prove that fame and charisma could unlock anything. Then, in the summer of 1994, that polished image was torn apart. When Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ronald Goldman were discovered murdered outside her Los Angeles home, suspicion turned to Simpson almost at once. Blood evidence, emerging DNA analysis, and the infamous glove created an image that horrified the public. What followed was not merely a courtroom drama, but a cultural event. Live broadcasts that turned legal strategy into theater and transformed the case into a flashpoint for debates about race, police conduct, and the privileges of celebrity. The controversial trial's outcome in 1995 verdict, not guilty, divided the nation. For many it was a vindication. For many others, it was proof that fame could buy impunity. A subsequent civil trial reached a very different conclusion, finding Simpson financially responsible for the deaths and ordering him to pay tens of millions, a judgment that confirmed lingering suspicions for those who had never accepted the controversial acquittal. In the years that followed, he remained a lightning rod. Arrests, strange public appearances, and a publication titled, "If I Did It," kept his name in headlines. Once celebrated for speed and grace, he became synonymous with arrogance, denial, and the spectacle of celebrity gone horribly wrong. His story remains less a simple fall than a mirror, showing how obsession with fame can warp public life and blur the lines of justice. 6. Mel Gibson. For years, Mel Gibson seemed to embody Hollywood royalty. From Lethal Weapon to Braveheart, he was both a blockbuster hero and an Academy Award-winning filmmaker. His charm effortless, his smile disarming, his faith seemingly unshakable. Loved by critics and audiences alike, he came to feel like a figure beyond reproach. When the mask slipped, though, it revealed a fury that stunned even his staunchest fans. In the mid-2000s, his public image unraveled. After a DUI stop in Malibu, he launched into a tirade so venomous it reverberated worldwide, laced with anti-Semitic invective aimed at the officers. An apology followed, but the stain remained. The noble warrior image was replaced by the sound of hate on tape. More revelations followed. Tapes of Gibson verbally attacking his then-partner, Oksana Grigorieva, surfaced, filled with racial slurs, threats, and sustained humiliation, and she accused him of physical abuse as well. The picture that emerged was of a man whose intensity that once powered his art could turn destructive and cruel. Hollywood recoiled, projects evaporated, collaborators kept their distance, and the industry that once lionized him treated his career as a cautionary tale. He would eventually mount a tentative comeback with Hacksaw Ridge, and receive guarded praise, but the controversies never fully faded. Gibson's arc is a reminder that talent and bigotry can coexist, and that unchecked power can hollow out a celebrated life. 5. Jared Fogle. For years, Jared Fogle was sold as America's feel-good miracle, an ordinary man who shed more than 200 pounds by leaning on Subway sandwiches, the upbeat emblem of discipline and possibility. His tale ran on daytime television, magazine covers, and billboards. Parents pointed to him as a model, and children queued to hear him speak at schools. He was not a traditional celebrity so much as a manufactured symbol of innocence. That carefully curated image collapsed in 2015 when federal agents swept into his Indiana home and uncovered a trove of illicit material involving children. Investigators also found evidence that he had crossed state lines to abuse minors, shattering the persona he had paraded for years. He pleaded guilty to possessing child pornography and to traveling to engage in sensitive matters acts with minors. A judge called the offenses a lifetime of deceit and sent him to federal prison for more than 15 years, while mandating lifetime registration as a sex offender. The company that had built a brand around his smile removed him from its advertising almost immediately, and behind bars he became a reviled figure, his familiar grin now synonymous with betrayal. His story is no longer one of weight loss or willpower, but a warning about how trust can be weaponized by someone who looks like the safest person in the room. 4. Phil Spector. Once heralded as the very sound of the American dream, Phil Spector's wall of sound helped define an era of pop lavish, dramatic, and unforgettable. He produced records for the era's biggest acts, shaping songs that became the soundtrack to youth and heartbreak. To collaborators, he was a genius. To the public, he was a visionary. Yet behind the studio glass, his brilliance was shadowed by volatility. Colleagues described explosive tantrums, women told of firearms brandished in their faces, and acquaintances learned to fear the man they had once admired. He ruled his world with an obsession for control, wrapped in a web of paranoia that suggested he believed he was beyond consequence. That illusion shattered when actress Lana Clarkson was found dead of a gunshot wound in his home. He insisted it was personal despair, but residue, blood evidence, and witness accounts suggested otherwise. After an initial mistrial, a later jury convicted him of second-degree murder, and he spent the remainder of his life incarcerated, dying behind bars in 2021. The producer who once turned noise into harmony left behind a legacy marred by violence, a reminder that creative brilliance can be corroded by ego and fear. 3. Roman Polanski. Once celebrated as one of contemporary cinema's great auteurs, Polanski built a reputation on films that mined paranoia, power, and moral decay. Rosemary's Baby sent shivers through audiences, Chinatown helped define a noir revival, and The Pianist would later bring him the highest honors. His life read like a tragic artist's myth until the late 1970s. He was arrested in Los Angeles after accusations that he had drugged and sexually assaulted a 13-year-old girl during what was meant to be a professional photo shoot. The accounts were stark: champagne and sedatives, a child left vulnerable in the home of a celebrated director. Under a plea bargain, he admitted to unlawful sex with a minor, but fled the United States before facing a judge and has not returned. Exile did not end his creative output. From Europe, he kept directing acclaimed pictures and collecting prizes while remaining an international fugitive. Hollywood fractured. Some defended his talent as separate from his transgressions, others refused to separate the art from the man. Every honor he received reignited debates about moral accountability in the film world. In the years that followed, additional allegations from other women added weight to a pattern that many could no longer dismiss as a single lapse. Polanski has consistently portrayed himself as the target of persecution rather than an abuser, a stance that has done little to quiet his critics. His story forces a persistent question: can artistic genius absolve or excuse real harm? Polanski's films often probe guilt and innocence, yet his life remains a troubling example of fame entangled with moral failure. 2. Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson towered over pop culture, a performer whose music, movement, and mystique felt almost otherworldly. Albums like Thriller and Bad rewired what a pop star could be. His voice, choreography, and image became shorthand for genius. For decades he was adored, seemingly untouchable, living inside a carefully curated world. Yet that world harbored shadows that would come to define the latter part of his life. Rumors began in the early 1990s, with families describing odd visits to Neverland, children invited to sleep over, and boundaries explained away as innocence. In 1993, he agreed to a civil settlement with the family of a 13-year-old who accused him of serious allegations. No controversial conviction, but the payout silenced some questions and deepened others. Devotees clung to the image of a misunderstood artist. Critics saw a pattern that could not be excused. In 2005, he faced controversial charges and a courtroom spectacle watched around the world. Witnesses described secrecy and manipulation. His defense argued he was a vulnerable, exploited eccentric. The jury returned a not guilty verdict, clearing him legally but not necessarily morally in the court of public opinion. Even after his death in 2009, the allegations would not disappear. The documentary Leaving Neverland renewed outrage as two men recounted years of alleged grooming that began in childhood. The estate dismissed the film as fiction, but the debate cleaved audiences between those who could separate the art from the artist and those who could not. Michael Jackson remains a figure of tangled contradictions, a cultural innovator whose work reshaped music and performance, and a man whose life is shadowed by accusations that persist in memory. No controversial conviction ever followed, yet suspicion follows his name like a permanent echo, complicating any simple remembrance of his brilliance. 1. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein inhabited a world most people only imagined: private jets, island estates, friendships with presidents, royalty, and Hollywood power players. He presented himself as a financier, a man of influence who amassed wealth through connections and charm. Behind the tailored suits and courteous smile, however, he was assembling something far darker, a network of exploitation that spanned years and ruined lives. Rumors trailed him for decades, stories of young girls flown to his private island, of massages that were anything but, and of associates who turned their heads because asking questions was inconvenient. The rich and powerful attended his gatherings, posed for photos, and accepted his largesse. Very few wondered how a man with little obvious business infrastructure could live like royalty. In 2008, he finally faced a legal reckoning, accused of abusing scores of underage victims in Florida. What many hoped would end in strict punishment instead became a secretive plea agreement. He served only 13 months, spending much of that time on work release outside jail walls. The case showed how the system could bend for those with means. Silence did not hold. In 2019, federal prosecutors charged him again, this time with sex trafficking of minors across state lines and international borders. The evidence was substantial: photographs, witness testimony, flight logs, and the island itself. For survivors, it was long overdue validation. For the powerful circles around him, it induced panic. Epstein knew secrets that could topple reputations. A month later, he was found dead in his cell, an apparent personal despair that many refused to accept. His death ignited conspiracy theories that persist because his wrongdoing implicated others who had enabled, protected, or ignored him. The story never belonged to him alone. Jeffrey Epstein's name has become shorthand for privilege masking corruption, a predator operating in the velvet rooms of the elite. He proved that evil does not need fame to thrive. It needs power and people willing to look away. In the annals of modern scandal, he stands as a chilling example, the host who revealed how deep the rot ran behind high society's smiles. Fame elevates people to godlike status, but every god has a price. These 15 figures had talent, influence, and adoration. Yet behind the spotlight, they built empires of fear, pain, and deceit. Their stories remind us that malevolence does not hide in darkness alone, it sits in plain sight, smiling for the camera. Which revelation shocked you the most? Tell us below, and do not forget to subscribe for more untold stories from Hollywood's darkest side. Fame fashions gods, and every god requires a sacrifice. They stood under blinding lights, worshipped and exalted, while behind the velvet curtain they built kingdoms of fear, pain, and painstaking illusion. These are not secrets tucked away in the dark. They live in plain sight, smiling for the camera as the world applauded. Which of these revelations lingers with you? Tell us below, and subscribe for more quiet reckonings from cinema's hidden corners.